Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the 12th session of the Big Sky Virtual Town Hall. We began this show back in March when COVID-19 had the news cycle spinning and the state of Montana was under a stay-at-home order. We wanted to offer another way to communicate with all of you and felt like it offered a connection in a time when we were all feeling very isolated. Now, 5 months later, we're still at it, and we hope you've enjoyed our show and maybe even learned something along the way. Tonight's session is dedicated to one industry that, at least in Southwest Montana, is thriving amid this global pandemic: real estate. And we've got a great show lined up for you tonight. We have expert panelists in the field, including a data expert from New York City, to discuss our topic. In the midst of this pandemic and uncertainty, are we seeing a new migration west? I'm Joe O'Connor, editor-in-chief for EBS newspaper here in Big Sky, Montana, and I'm joined, as always, by my colleague, EBS local editor, Brandon Walker. Brandon, who do we have on the show tonight?
Thanks, Joe. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors this evening, Shore to Summit Wealth Management, L&K Real Estate, and the Big Sky Chamber of Commerce. Tonight's lineup features some impressive firepower in the world of real estate. We have Ania Bulis, VP of Sales for the Big Sky Real Estate Company, Eric Ladd, the owner of L&K Real Estate in Big Sky, Robyn Erlenbush, who owns ERA Landmark Real Estate in Bozeman, and Mike Magrans, a principal at the consulting firm Ernst & Young in New York City. Let's get things started. An avid traveler and self-proclaimed explorer, Ania Bulis has been part of the Big Sky community for 26 years. She's one of the founders of the Big Sky Real Estate Company, which began in 2017. Ania, thank you for joining us to share your insight on the local real estate market tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So from a business standpoint, what was your initial reaction when COVID-19 began to spread throughout the US?
I think initially we all sort of took a little bit of a pause, and that would be where my head was at when it first started. I don't think I quite anticipated the response that we had starting in late May, but for the first couple of months, you could tell that everybody was reflecting on the current situation wherever they were and just trying to, for themselves and for their families, figure out what life would look like once things had settled. And so my initial reaction was we were going to, sort of see a pause, and that's certainly what happened for the first couple of months.
And since then, though, what have you witnessed?
Yeah, so it's almost as if when school ended, everybody decided they were going on a road trip, and somehow all roads led to Montana, and specifically for us to the Bozeman and Big Sky area. And people are reevaluating how they want to spend their time. People are reevaluating where they want to educate their children. People are reevaluating how much they can actually work from home and whether or not they need to go into the offices. And it reminded me of myself a little bit, because in 1994, I moved to Big Sky and spent what started as 6 months, but ended up being 3 years here, and then moved to Boston, moved here from New York, moved back to Boston. And within 8 months, I realized that if there was a place that I wanted to live year round, Big Sky was a great place to do that. And I think that that's sort of where a lot of people have landed in this COVID era.
Yeah, and you discussed the possibility of working from home that's kind of been brought to light by the pandemic. Why do you believe people are choosing to relocate to Southwest Montana in particular?
Well, I don't think it's just Southwest Montana. I think it's a lot of resort communities. I think it's a lot of outdoor communities. And if you look across the board, yes, we're certainly seeing an uptick, but so are other areas that are less urban. And the rationale there is I think people are looking for more space. They have a new appreciation for the outdoors. I certainly hope that museums and areas of culture come back in a robust fashion in the very near future, but for the time being, that is taking a back seat a little bit to the safety piece. And I think people are finding themselves, those people that are finding themselves in positions where they want to spend more time with their family and more time outdoors, and Big Sky and other locations like it are faring favorably.
Yeah. Well, you discussed resort towns other than Big Sky. So What similarities and differences are you noticing on a national versus the local market in terms of trends within the real estate industry?
So both real estate and non-real estate industry, we're seeing a migration outside of the cities and into the suburbs. Some friends of mine who had houses for sale outside of New York City, in Connecticut, who were having a tough time selling over the last few years, instantly saw multiple offers as people wanted to leave the city. We certainly are seeing it in other resort communities throughout the Rockies. Jackson's seeing it, the Colorado resorts are seeing it, Park City's seeing it. So certainly we're seeing a migration out of the urban areas and into the suburbs and resort communities.
Yeah, and you mentioned people receiving multiple offers when they previously had kind of been stagnant. Are buyers purchasing homes and properties at, above, or even below asking price? And what are negotiations like between buyers and sellers at this point?
It obviously, it always varies depending on the property. We're seeing some come in over asking. We're seeing multiple offers or multiple counter offers, but we're also seeing some deals coming in under asking. It just simply depends on the piece of real estate. I would say if there's one place that's stronger than others, it's those opportunities that are move-in ready. Certainly sorry, my phone's ringing. Certainly are allowing, are having more buyers coming into those specific properties, much more so than land, although land is also seeing an increase in activity.
Yeah, and you mentioned land seeing an increase in activity. Development in Big Sky is a hot topic. How much opportunity is there left to further develop Big Sky, in your opinion?
Well, sorry, I paused. Obviously, there's a lot of opportunity in Big Sky. I think from what I've seen, there's really been thoughtful planning and development being done, especially in the resort areas. I really appreciate the fact that all the parts are actually working together. So whether you're looking at town center, or you're looking at some of the private resorts, or whether you're even looking at some of the property owners that are independent, that are doing developments in and around Big Sky, you're seeing a lot of collaboration. People are working with each other. People are understanding of what their projects, what the project needs are. So from that perspective, I'm pleasantly surprised, I guess, at what I've seen.
And obviously you have a knowledge of the local developments. Can you provide a brief update on what you know that is going on throughout Big Sky?
So if local developments mean Spanish Peaks and Moonlight Basin, yes. I mean, we're sort of moving in the same trajectory, in the same direction that we have been with both of those communities. So not necessarily building more and building more quickly, but really just sort of in line with what we've been doing. And if anything, perhaps COVID is creating, it will probably push us to develop a little more quickly in the next couple of years in terms of some of the projects that we've had on the drawing boards, but not anything that wasn't already originally in the works.
Yeah, well, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball at you. I heard you mentioning when we were on before the call started that you know, your hours have been expanded as a result. Can you discuss that a little further?
Well, you know, first of all, I have an amazing group that I work with and an amazing team. And somebody was saying, how are you holding up? And my response was, they're actually holding me up. But we do work longer hours, and it's not just real estate. All of us are. One of the things, you know, we have had some blessings with COVID, and that was the pause that we sort of talked about earlier today. But the after effect has certainly been a roller coaster ride in terms of hours and the long hours that all of us, and I say that as it relates to healthcare workers, and we certainly saw our teachers putting in lots of hours when we went to schooling online. And, you know, it's sort of our turn now. We're putting in a lot of hours this summer. And my sense is that by Labor Day weekend, I think it will probably slow down a little bit, in the sense that individuals will have decided whether or not they want to be in Montana, whether they can be in Montana, or whether they are going to continue the schooling and the working from their original homes. So I think we'll see a little bit of a slowdown at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And following up on the Spanish Peaks, or Moonlight bit that you just touched on briefly, how much real estate has been contracted at Moonlight in the past 90 days?
Oh, you're asking me a statistical question. I'm not sure that I actually can answer that accurately. So I may have to get back to you guys on that, and you might have to do a follow-up. A great deal. And both resale and developer product in both communities, we've seen a much higher transaction volume just across the board and throughout Big Sky. So it's not just development specific, it really is truly across the whole entire community. And I will say, I think part of that is, you know, while the governor mandated masks, Big Sky mandated masks even before then. And I'm sort of proud of this community for doing that, for recognizing the health and safety of not just our tourists and not just our visitors, but for all of our community members and owners and residents.
Well, while we're on the topic of masks, we discussed that you're an avid traveler. So given the current status of COVID-19 in the US, do you have any travel plans in the near future?
Not yet, but every day I look to see which country is going to let us in. No, obviously we want to be respectful of other people's safety and not just mine. But I also, we have this one life to live, and whatever your passion is, I hope everybody is continuing along those lines. So yes, I will have travel plans in the future this fall, hopefully.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ania. That's all I had for you, but I want to toss it over to Joe and see if we have any audience or follow-up questions.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. And Ania, thank you for joining us. We really, enjoy having you on here. It's great to see you around in the community, but also have you on the show and chat a little bit about your expertise. And we don't have any questions from the audience right now, but I do have a follow-up question. I was just kind of curious, just from your own perspective, you talked a little about how you're holding up and how your team is really the ones that you feel are holding you up. And I feel like that a lot of us feel that way. You can't travel right now. You're an avid traveler. What are you doing to keep yourself sane these times?
All right. Well, so I fished for the first time. I caught my first fish this summer. That was amazing. I'm spending a lot of time outdoors. I'm trying to do yoga as much as possible, and really trying to enjoy the little moments with family. Believe it or not, the nightly walks are fantastic. It's the little stuff. So just as much time as possible outside, because as we all know, Montana is a lovely place, but it really is spectacular in the summer. And so just trying to enjoy that as much as possible with the ones I love.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we can count ourselves lucky in that regard. Well, Ania, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Eric Ladd is the owner of L&K Real Estate in Big Sky and also the CEO of Outlaw Partners and publisher of EBS newspaper. He's in the middle of things in this small mountain town and has been for more than 20 years. Eric, it's nice to have you on the other side of an interview.
Yeah, good to be here, Joe. Let's see. I'm watching how you do here.
Yeah, well, thanks. Appreciate it. So, obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic has been devastating on a number of levels. As an owner of a real estate company, what went through your mind in late March when Big Sky began really seeing some of the effects?
Well, it goes back to my mentors in the real estate industry, what they taught me early on, like my grandfather and father taught me, and it's that real estate will cycle. And it's for things that you least expect and what will cause a real estate market to cycle. So when this first hit, we all sat back and wondered if this was going to be that next downturn or correction in the market, which will hit at some point in time. And it got quiet. As Ania said, there was a couple month pause there where everybody was taking, the time to basically reflect on what was going to happen. And then lo and behold, it didn't correct. It went quite the opposite. So, to answer your question, I think everybody, like I said, they sat back and took pause. But one of the nice things coming into this was that we did learn from the last recession, and people were really smart about how they not only were purchasing real estate, there was a lot more control on debt versus equity ratios on real estate, but also the developers came into this in a lot more healthy state. So for example, in Big Sky, our developers were flush coming into this. They were really smart about how they capitalized their projects. They were really in control of their own destiny, and there wasn't the banks that were controlling it. So because of that end result, and then also because of a lot of the points that Ania just touched on, people choosing to come west or east for that matter, and they've landed in places like this. So we took pause, and then we're pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, pleasantly surprised. I mean, certainly turned into, a situation I don't think many people expected. I mean, there are quite a lot, it appears quite a lot of sales in Southwest Montana right now in the real estate market. When did you first realize that the market may not suffer as much as we feared it might?
We tend to trend 60 to 90 days behind more mature markets. And so what I mean by that is markets like Bend, Oregon, for example. When we started seeing their uptick there, similar lifestyles, similar profiles to a buyer that would buy in Bozeman or Big Sky, or you go to a market like Telluride or Vail, once again, a little more mature than Big Sky, we tend to be a couple months behind them. So what we started to see is our counterparts in those markets started to report some pretty robust activity. We sensed that it was probably going to show up here, and it did. And it ended up being about 45 to 60 days behind when those markets really had their uptick. It started to show up here. Everybody's phones started ringing more. And then once our governor kind of properly, allowed for some travel to start occurring here, people started to show up in droves. And all you have to do is look around town and see the license plates now to see what's happened.
Yeah, it's quite the array of tourism going on, which is, great for the economy, the local economy, the Bozeman economy. Speaking of those, can you give some comparisons and contrast to the Big Sky market versus the Bozeman market?
Big Sky and Bozeman have always had kind of this brother-sister relationship, in my opinion. So when I first started real estate here, when someone like Ania was starting out in this market, Big Sky was really, an afterthought in a way. I mean, it was just this little resort town that was starting up and no one really quite understood it. Or you could even talk to people in Bozeman who really did not understand the magnitude of the dream and the vision of what was about to happen here. Bozeman was, a much more mature standard market, great mountain town, but they had industry and they had a university and an airport and things like that. So Bozeman, I would say in the early years, definitely had a little more stability, whereas Big Sky was a little bit more the Wild West. Fast forward, Big Sky got this huge infusion of capital through a lot of the big investors that have come in and a lot of the big development groups. And now what you're starting to see is, I've always said, you're starting to see this joining of Big Sky and Bozeman where they're coming together. They estimate 3,000 workers a day come up from Bozeman to Big Sky to work. I mean, anybody could do the math on the impact that Big Sky development now has to Bozeman. Vice versa, Bozeman's a huge supporting mechanism for Big Sky. A lot of the needs and services and industries and supplies and all that stuff is coming out of Bozeman. And now Bozeman's obviously starting to become a bigger hub for our housing because Big Sky pricing has gotten so high that a lot of people have been priced out of this market, and a lot of people are choosing to move to Big Sky or to Bozeman because of either prices or quality of life. Kind of a rambling answer to say that we are very connected, and we are connected at the hip. And what happens in Bozeman impacts Big Sky, and what happens in Big Sky impacts Bozeman. But I think this is going to be a long-standing relationship, and my prediction is this is only going to grow more and more together. I think people in Big Sky are starting to get more involved with the university. More people in Big Sky are sitting on boards like at the airport and other decision-making mechanisms that really impact us. So we are in this together.
Sure. Let me ask you, Eric, in 20 plus years of being in this real estate market, what stands out to you the most right now?
The old adage, if you build it, they will come. And I said this in my last update, for 20 years, we've been talking about how Big Sky was going to we do all this arm waving of, we were going to eventually have a downtown, or we were going to have more restaurants or shops and such. And what happened was Big Sky was built in reverse of most mountain ski towns. Most mountain ski towns were built, they were a mining town or they were a small town before they became a resort. We built in reverse. Big Sky Resort launched on their own, independent, great vision. The Kircher family did a phenomenal job getting that up and going, but they did it kind of isolated on their own, Big Sky Resort. Then Blixeth came to town, huge pioneer, stepped out way out there ahead of his time and got Yellowstone Club up and going. And then the Pools got Moonlight up and going, and Blixeth and the Dolans got Spanish Peaks up and going. And then the roller coasters that happened after that. But point being is that we never really had that heartbeat of a town before, we had all this real estate developed. So billions of dollars in real estate have been built and sold in Big Sky before we even had a town. Well, now 20 years later, we're getting a town. And so you're starting to see a semblance of body heat, Main Street, shops, gathering points, that type of stuff happening. So probably one of the most, standout points to me over the last 20 years is that we're finally becoming a town. And what I'm curious to see what happens is because we don't have leadership, we're not incorporated, is what's going to happen. We choose our own destiny here. Are we going to become a resort or are we going to become a town? And that's where I think there's a lot of exciting opportunity for us to come together and get some semblance of vision of what we'd like this place to look like 20 years from now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's interesting to see, or at least, from my perspective, to ask the questions, who's calling the shots. And I think many people do have those questions. Let's switch over to kind of buyers and sellers. Where can a buyer still find value right now in the market?
A buyer in today's market right now is land. If you can find a good piece of land, you will usually find that if you study the value of that land, comparison to going back as long as 2008, you're still buying at a relatively good value. For example, you can go up into markets like up in the Big Easy or the Gallatin Preserve, or we've got an amazing lot, 160 acres lots listed up called Royal Coachman on top of Big Easy. Those prices are below the peak in '07. So there's a great opportunity to find a piece of land, and it can be anywhere in Big Sky and do relatively well. And if you were to study the value of that land, and this can even be in markets like Spanish Peaks or Moonlight, and Ania is way more of an expert on those markets than I am, you could study the values of those markets and go against a Telluride or Jackson Hole, and you are doing very well on those purchase prices. So land is where I'm saying right now there's great value. I'm seeing a little bit of a pocket of value still at Spanish Peaks right now. I think Spanish Peaks is a little bit misunderstood of what that is to become. And they have a massive project called the Montage being built there right now. And when that opens, look out. It's going to be a game changer for Spanish Peaks. And I think you'll see a huge pop in value there. So I think the Spanish Peaks Mountain Club is another place to study for those that are interested in a private club experience. I think you could do very well there. We're all benefiting from the trickle down of Yellowstone Club right now. Yellowstone Club's nearing sellout, and the numbers there are astronomical. So I think everything is getting the what I call the YC lift as well. But land in Spanish Peaks is be my summary for value right now for buyers.
So yeah, so there's your advice for buyers. Keep an eye out for land. What about sellers? What do you got for them, advice wise?
It's you are in a seller's market. If you have thought about selling, the time to sell is now. Get a good firm representing you. Do your data. Do your studies. Understand value. Don't get greedy. Don't try to price way ahead of this market right now. You have already recovered a tremendous amount of value in the last 3 years or even in the last 12 months. Price to market, move it quick, and you have done very well. We are in a real estate cycle, and Mike later on in this will be able to speak a little bit about cycles. Nobody knows when it's going to cycle down. It will. It is a guaranteed real estate will cycle. It's just at a certain point in time, prices outprice what buyers can afford. Stuff doesn't make sense. It doesn't pencil, and it will cycle. And you as a seller, if you've gotten greedy and waited too long, you can benefit, or you're going to have to ride through that next cycle. We are at a top somewhere. I'm not saying I'm predicting it's going to happen immediately, but we are near a top for sure. So sellers, be smart. Don't be greedy. Get a good firm representing you and move it.
Well, so you just talked about where we are. We're somewhere near the pinnacle. We're somewhere near the top. We don't know exactly. Maybe it's on the way up, on the way down. Who knows? What are the risks with this market right now?
You know, I think the biggest market or the biggest risk in any real estate market is greed. And greed can roll over into a lot of different parts of the real estate market. That could be speculators getting way out over their skis. My dad used to say, and this is no disrespect to pilots, but he goes, when pilots start building spec homes, look out. That's when, you know, when everybody thinks they're a builder and everybody can speculate on the real estate market, that's when you should start being scared. The other thing to start, you know, looking for is when things just don't make sense. When people can't afford to put a business into a commercial space, that's a dangerous time. So I think those are things that everybody should be, you know, aware of. And we all have a little bit of control over this. And this is where it's important, where landlords make sure that you give rates that tenants can afford. And people are selling and not being greedy. You're moving up incrementally in a real estate market. The banks have a lot more constraints on them now on lending. So we're protected on that side where you don't get the goofy loans like of years past. So I think that, you know, the word greed usually comes to mind when I get concerned about a real estate market. I'm not screaming fire right now. I think the fundamentals are very strong in the real estate market. People are buying with cash. And especially in Southwest Montana, it reminds me of a market like Boulder, Colorado. When you've got good quality of life and people buying for the right reasons, you tend not to get the big crashes that you would see in a big metropolitan market or somewhere like Las Vegas or Phoenix. So I'm not as concerned, but look out for greed and look out for pilots building spec homes.
Yeah, Boulder's quite a busy place these days. You know, we do live in a ski community. And I'm just curious what your perspective is. How might Big Sky Resort affect the market this winter?
Well, they're the center of the universe. There's no doubt about it. The ski lifts spinning are a huge reason that people move here. But I think we've also matured beyond that. In past years, if you'd have asked me what would happen if the resort wouldn't open, I would say mass devastation across the board, every industry. Learning from COVID, what I've realized is we're getting depth to this community beyond the ski resort. Ski resort's critically important, no doubt. Everybody wants to go up and enjoy those powder ski runs in the wintertime. But people are now realizing it's a rounded out experience here. People move here because of quality of life, the rivers, the park, Bozeman, the university, the great airport. There's life beyond the ski resort now, and that starts to make me feel a little more bullish about the market because we have more fundamentals backing us than just the chairlifts.
Switching over just to some numbers here. You know, you're talking. We're seeing what's going on in Big Sky, Bozeman, Southwest Montana. What is the volume of real estate transactions here? You know, since COVID-19 hit.
You know, it's like catching a falling knife, trying to figure it out. Like Ania said, the stats questions are kind of tricky, but roughly speaking, in the last 90 days in Big Sky alone, we've done somewhere in the mid of $200 and some million worth of real estate transactions in the last 90 days. Now, here's the catch point of that. Amongst that data, Yellowstone Club is not reporting on that. So non-disclosure state, meaning people don't have to record data into the MLS system. Yellowstone Club rumored to have done somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 to $700 million since COVID happened. So taking even the low end of that, if you're adding that to the data that is reported in MLS, you're nearing somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 million to $1 billion in real estate that's been transacted since, let's call it, COVID hit. If those numbers check out, which I feel pretty confident they do, you are dealing with one of the largest real estate booms in any resort town in the Rocky Mountains. It's a staggering number, and it's done very quietly because of how Montana records and publicizes data in the area.
Wow, that is a staggering number. Wow. Okay, so what does Big Sky look like 20 years from now?
Well, we get to choose our own destiny, as I said. And I will say one thing on that number, and this is an exciting thing for everyone to realize. The trickle-down effect of nearly $1 billion in real estate being transacted, they estimated somewhere in the neighborhood of a 3 to 4x multiple as it goes down into Gallatin County and Madison County and all the jobs and businesses that spur out of that and all the trades and moving companies. And you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 to $4 billion worth of impact in the trickle-down effect for these counties since COVID happened. So, it's going to happen. There's going to be a massive, boom effectively because of this. So pretty exciting that that's happening. I think, I'm sorry, Joe, what does it look like in 20 years? I hope Big Sky looks like the most cutting edge, well thought out, planned mountain town in the Rockies, because we had no excuse not to execute that. We got to come from ground up since the mid 70s. We didn't inherit a mess of a mining town with problems or whatever. We got to create it all from ground up. And resources and money aren't an issue. It's frankly just been vision, leadership, and organization amongst the community. And we've done a pretty good job because we are on our own. I mean, we don't have that formal leadership. So I hope the community continues to come together. It's going to require some bigger vision in terms of some of the nonprofits and the developers coming together to make some hard decisions in the next 10 years in regards to things like conservation and some of the important businesses that we want to have here, how the school's going to look, how some of the public services are going to operate. But I hope that, we all come together and we get these things organized now so we can be really proud of something when we look back 20 years from now. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, we've seen it before, right? There's a number of ski resorts that are older than we are some have maybe done it right, some maybe haven't, but I think, it seems like the onus is on us. Well, look, Eric, thank you. Really appreciate taking the time. Some good insight there. Brandon, do you have any follow-up questions or any audience questions?
And hi, Eric, how's it going? I have a great audience follow-up to Joe's 20 years down the road question. This one comes from Janelle. Eric, do you think our community is ready to take another look at incorporation?
We had a spirited debate at dinner the other night with a bunch of folks about this, and I'm going to put her on the spot because Ania was included in this dinner conversation. And I think it was about this topic. And Janelle, I think we do, but I kind of feel like we've grown beyond the word of incorporation. Incorporation to me is like an easy point on a map to point to try to solve this unknown problem of feeling like we don't have representation or voice or thoughtful leadership to lead the area. And so I feel like while incorporation could work, and I feel that conversation should be ongoing, I almost feel like we need to figure out a more evolved way to come together as a community where stakeholders, being people that live here, feel like they've got representation, and there's some accountability, that there's someone that wakes up every day that they are paid to think about the best interest of this community. And it can't be the developers, and it can't be the Chamber of Commerce, and it can't be people that are volunteers on these boards. All those people are important, but there needs to be a person or persons who wake up every day and they're paid to look after your best interest and everyone else's best interests. And before we do that, we have to agree as a community, what's our vision? Like, where do we want to go? Do we just want to try to build this thing out and make the most money as ever? Or do we want to be known for conservation? Or do we want to be known for thoughtful arts and culture? All those important buzzwords need to first be identified, and then there needs to be thoughtful leadership to execute the plan. Maybe it's incorporation, or maybe it's some sort of other structure that we create that we can do faster than trying to incorporate. But we do need leadership.
Yeah, that's a great thought. Ania, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I'm in sync with Eric in the sense that we do, the thoughtful leadership piece is a really important one, and how to integrate all those community aspects that include the education, the arts, conservation, sustainability, and having somebody wake up every day. But just part of that conversation that Eric mentioned was around the fact at how quickly Big Sky was able to mobilize when COVID happened in our community, and when all of the resorts shut down and employees were let go, and how the various organizations, how the various nonprofits, and really how the community, the individuals within this community and the businesses got up, stood up, and really worked together to get the J1s home, to make sure that people that were unemployed were receiving funding, to help the nonprofits that were struggling all of a sudden. So really, I was incredibly proud. I sat Tatum on the Zoom call. No, I was incredibly proud. Sorry about that. I was incredibly proud of how well our community came together in that moment and how quickly we were able to do that. And I think that was because we were not incorporated. So to me, always wanting to have thoughtful leadership, but recognizing that we were able to act swiftly because we didn't have to jump through a lot of the different hoops that other cities would have had to jump through.
Yeah, well, thank you both for your input on that question.
Yeah, and Brandon, if I could just add one more thing to Janelle's great question, because this is a hot topic in Big Sky and it's only going to become hotter, is that, I like to look at it as a Mad Lib, is that Big Sky is known for blank. And that's us to still figure out as a community. When someone thinks of Jackson Hole, a lot of times they think of those elk antlers in the square and that amazing park that they set up for the elk refuge next to town. It was amazingly thoughtful that they did that. It was aggressive during its time, and now it's stood the test of time and has driven value in that area. You think of Park City, it's known for arts. It's known for their incredible film festival. What do we want to become known for? We can't just become known for gated private ski resorts. That's fine. It's great, and they're amazing. They're world class, but that's not the soul that I think everybody's searching for and trying to create our identity here. And that's our opportunity. Our community, since I've lived here, has, I think, funded 3 different studies where these outside people have come in and helped create these binders about 8 inches thick of what they think Big Sky's DNA is. And they're sitting on a shelf somewhere in somebody's office. I think we need to go dust those off. We need to reestablish what those words are, and then we need to execute and find out who's going to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is, like you said, a matter of determining who we want to be. Thank you again, Eric. That was great input, and thank you for joining us tonight.
You bet.
Next up, we have a native Montanan who relocated to Bozeman in 1981. Robyn Erlenbush began a real estate career in 1980. She became the owner of ERA Landmark Real Estate in 1990, overseeing branches in Bozeman, Big Sky, Livingston, and Ennis. She's a strong advocate for the arts and enjoys tending her garden in her free time. Robyn, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. Would you have anticipated the real estate boom that has spurred as a result of the pandemic?
I don't think I anticipated the size of it. As you and I talked earlier today, one of the things that I've lived through in my real estate career have been these, what I call flights away from density, flights to security, flights when you can live wherever you want to live and you can work remotely. So we saw it after 9/11. We saw it after the stock market crash, where people made conscious decisions about what was important in their life, what was important in their legacy properties, where they wanted to spend time with their kids and grandkids. So as I look back at the last 120, 150 days, it isn't really surprising, with a little bit of room from where we started in March. But in March, I didn't think it would be quite this overwhelming. We were all just paddling, making sure we were staying afloat.
So how surprising has it been for you then to see the boom and just absolute flourish of the real estate market at this point?
Well, one of the things that is really driving this market is, as Ania said earlier, there was this huge return to the metropolitan areas where you could go to the symphony, go to the opera, go to museums, go to sporting events. When that opportunity got taken away, and some predictions are that those events may not come back for several years. So people are reassessing how they want to spend, if you will, their time when they're not working. And it makes a lot of sense to look at smaller communities, communities that are perceived to have more outdoor recreation, communities that are perceived to potentially be safer, have small town values. And I think we're benefiting tremendously from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned outdoor recreation. What are some of the themes that you are hearing people discuss when they explain their reason for relocating to Southwest Montana?
One of the things that we have seen, and interestingly enough, when you look at our markets, they're really quite small. So we're seeing a large uptick. When you put it in perspective of what's happening in the rest of the nation, many of the metropolitan areas are still thriving. We are a small percentage of people that are migrating. But I think the reality of it is that we potentially could see this as a sustainable trend for a few more years.
Yeah, well, you just mentioned the national market. So as you analyze trends, what are you seeing in that on a national level versus here in Southwest Montana?
Well, a couple of things that I've been involved in recently. I've done some national webinars specifically on real estate economics. And one of the things that we saw in real estate was a V recovery. Real estate came back substantially quicker than, like, for example, the hospitality market, the travel market, the entertainment market. Those areas are all still quite stifled in comparison to real estate. So there's been a surprising recovery. As the other speaker said earlier, we kind of went on pause for the first couple weeks of March. But one of the things I did after we talked today is I tried to quantify what has really happened in the marketplace. And I'll just speak to the greater Bozeman marketplace for right now, which is Bozeman, Belgrade, Manhattan, rural Bozeman. I went and tried to look at where the opportunity was and where the buyers were really focusing on our market. From basically, I did April 1 through the end of July. So a 4-month period, $1 million homes and above, we saw a 56% increase in sales. Many of those are from out of state and many of those are cash.
That's incredible.
It is quite an incredible number. We've also seen a strong trend. One of the strongest markets has been the Livingston market. Now, part of that is it's a great value proposition, but part of it is it has a very, very small town, community-oriented aura to us, plus arts and culture and the incredible fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when we talked earlier, we discussed supply and demand and kind of how those are not exactly in sync at the moment. Can you discuss where development is in relation to the demand in the market right now in the Bozeman area?
So it's hard to quantify what the demand really is because we have such a shortage of inventory. We do not have enough basically shovel-ready lots to really take care of the demand. We've had thousands of rental units built in the last few years. Some beautiful luxury units have also been built, and we do not have vacancy factor yet in the community. So we still have a large amount of people moving in, and we still have not really solved that supply and demand issue. So we have an unbalanced market, which is still a seller-oriented market.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, Eric touched on cycles a little while ago. So I would like to ask you, when do you believe real estate sales will begin to slow down to a more normal rate once again?
It's the infamous crystal ball question. And the reality of it is, I will leave that to the last speaker to predict. But here's what I do know. And Eric really hit the nail on the head. There is so much commerce being driven by construction in Big Sky that we do have some sustainability factors that we didn't have in the last recession. We're seeing more and more cash buyers. We're seeing people that are not dependent on a job in Bozeman. They basically are still employed by Google or Amazon or whomever, and they're working from home. So we could potentially see these current market conditions, I think, continue through the end of the year and into next year. It will all truly be inventory driven. There's two other aspects in the market for those who are not paying cash. Interest rates are at an all-time low in at least our recent history in the last 20 years. You can actually get a mortgage under 3%. We're also seeing first-time home buyers come back into the national market at the highest level it's been in over a decade. So there are some factors, national factors, above and beyond just our local factors that are coming into play. But the thing we need to always remember is real estate is hyper local. So we have to be very, very careful to look at the interaction between Bozeman and Big Sky. We have to be very careful to look at where that tipping point may occur. I'm always concerned when you start to see double-digit appreciation in median sales prices, that, for example, when the Big Sky market had its correction, and its correction was larger than the Bozeman market or surrounding areas, we were seeing prices go up at 20 to 25% a year. You know that's not sustainable. We haven't seen those percentages yet, but that when you start to see prices increasing year over year at 10 to 15%, you have to question how long you can sustain that.
Yeah, well, with it's tough to predict when exactly we will reach that tipping point or the climax exactly. So I would like to ask you as well, what are the greatest pros and cons to a booming real estate market such as this?
Well, it's very interesting from the Bozeman perspective. We have been well prepared for growth. If you look at the growth in all the new elementary schools, the new high school, the infrastructure that's been put in at the hospital, both in Bozeman and in Big Sky, we are prepared for substantial growth. We may not be prepared for the growth rate we're on right now. So one of the pros of growth is obviously the economic impact of what it can have on a community from a tax base, from a trickle down aspect, and just the commerce that is created by growth. The commerce that is created for anything from a Costco to a Target to a downtown business to a restaurant to an art gallery. The downside is obvious. I wouldn't say we have gridlock in Bozeman, but you can tell the MSU students are back, and we have bingo, state license plate competitions going on. We have a lot of travelers here right now. The downside, I think that's the most crucial for us to all understand, and Ania touched on this, is the challenges with social services and supporting social services. And let me just give you this one statistic, which I find absolutely amazing when you think about the generosity of our communities. So I just finished up co-chairing an $18 million campaign for Bozeman Health called Caring Forward. We finished that up and celebrated that on President's Day weekend. When COVID hit, we had unsolicited gifts of over $4 million flow into the healthcare system. It helped us fast track ICU. It helped us finish out hospital beds in Big Sky. And many of those private sector and foundation gifts were centered right in the Big Sky market. So it does speak to Eric's concept of we are starting to recognize how interconnected we are as one greater community.
Yeah, wow, that's an incredible amount of money. Lastly, I would just like to delve a little deeper and kind of discuss the residential versus commercial side of things, and what are you witnessing in terms of trends or corresponding moves in both aspects of the market?
Well, interestingly enough, our commercial market, for example, pre-COVID, we were fairly well leased up. There were buildings under construction. For example, North 7th or Midtown, there is a ton of new construction right there that is not finished and not fully leased. But we haven't seen dramatic fallout. We've seen a big box or two go away. Main Street has been relatively stable. That's something to watch very carefully in the coming months because retailers and food and beverage have been hit very, very hard. There is a great opportunity, and always when people move here, they bring that incredible entrepreneurial dream of starting a business or taking over an existing business. So we have to watch commercial, I think, very carefully. I think commercial, it could be fragile with smaller businesses in both Big Sky and in Bozeman.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Robyn. I just want to step back and ask you a personal question. Ania touched on the demanding hours right now in the real estate market. So how's your garden doing? Are you being able to get out and tend to that as frequently as you'd like right now?
I have the best COVID garden I have ever had. It's just me and the deer. We duke it out every day, but that's my solace. And if I had any piece of advice for all of us who have been at this, when we first started, we are all AAA batteries, and we thought we were running a sprint. And we're not running a sprint, and we have to find life balance. We have to find balance with our families, with our colleagues, and with our clients. Anya's right. There have to be boundaries that are set so that we can stay well and we can stay on top of our game, but recognizing that it's okay not to go at this frantic pace that we've been at for the last 4 and 5 months.
Yeah, that's very good advice right there. Thank you, Robyn. That's all I had, but I want to toss things over to Joe and see if we have any questions for the audience or any follow-up questions from him. Thank you again.
You bet.
Yeah, thank you, Robyn. We really enjoyed your insight tonight. No questions at this stage, but really enjoyed your insight, and thank you for offering that Bozeman perspective and speaking from all your experience. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Mike Magrans is a principal in the strategy and transaction consulting practice of Ernst & Young LLP, with a focus on the real estate, hospitality, and construction industry. He spent a significant amount of time in Montana and the Rocky Mountain West, and even worked in Alta, Utah on its ski race crew. Mike Magrans, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Joe, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I got you loud and clear.
Okay, good.
First, Mike, tell us a little about your work with Ernst & Young and how that, is relates to the Northern Rockies and the market here.
Sure. Our team advises investors, owners, and developers on really large-scale commercial investment properties and development projects. So it could be performing financial due diligence on an acquisition of a large office building in New York, or a market feasibility study related to the development of a resort community in Montana. We work with many of the large resort owners and operators in the ski industry on related to transactions, valuations, audit, and tax.
Gotcha. Ski towns seem to be the places to be these days. Are we in the midst of a new Western migration?
Yeah, it's so interesting listening to all the other panelists, and the overwhelming answer is yes. And this was happening pre-COVID. The ability to work remotely because of high-speed internet, combined with air access to ski destinations, not just Bozeman, but Jackson Hole and Telluride and Vail, it really opened up the possibility of working in those types of locations. COVID-19 simply accelerated, it lit a fire. And the trend really proved out that you can work remotely, you can have access to the outdoors, you can still connect with your teams, you could still be productive. I mean, I'll tell you, our team, maybe because it's all the hours that we're working, the additional hours, but we're just as productive, if not more productive, working remotely. And the Rocky Mountains are competitive when it comes to jobs and higher education and a lower cost of living. So it just becomes really attractive and enticing to work, live, and play in that environment.
Yeah, sure. It's tough to sit in 2 hours of LA traffic if you don't have to, huh?
That's right. Yeah.
So kind of following up on that, thinking about office buildings, these spaces, skyscrapers in New York City and other metropolitan areas of thousands of people working in them. Do you see people going back to work in these types of offices again?
In the long term, absolutely. The return to work will be real. We have swung so far to one side of the pendulum, and we will swing back. The rural and suburban living that we've all been talking about, it isn't for everyone. We all love it. But if you're young and single and millennial and looking for diversity and nightlife and 18-hour, 24-hour cities, you're not going to get that in Big Sky or Bozeman. You can get a taste of it But I think over the long term, there will be a return to, gateway cities. And, look at what Facebook just did this week. They announced that they're taking another 700,000 square feet on top of their 1.5 million of existing square feet in Hudson Yards in New York City. And so you've got Amazon and Apple and Facebook, all these FANGs. They're not going to stop investing in New York or LA or San Francisco, but the way that they work is going to certainly change in the short to midterm and over the long term too. I think you're going to see flexibility. You're going to see how that office gets used is very different. So we're talking to our clients about, hey, maybe you should think about working 2 or 3 days a week in the office and 2 or 3 days remotely. And when you do come to the office, it's for meetings or it's for events or for its community and team building. It's not to sit in an office or in your pew, for 9 hours a day. It's just much more collaborative use of space. The reality is real estate is very expensive in these gateway cities. And so in the short term, I do think you'll have some pullback. All of our clients are really thinking long and hard about the expense of real estate and are making some adjustments. But again, over the long 5, 10, 20-year periods, I do think you'll still have people that want to live and work in cities like New York.
Sure. Well, maybe more in the immediate then, and specifically over the last 5 months since this pandemic's really taken hold. What data are you seeing regarding folks moving to Montana and the greater West?
Yeah, it's funny. You all talk about how many out-of-state license plates there are and in the real estate sales. The reality is the outflow from New York City is substantial, but more than 50% of that out-migration is going to other parts of the Northeast, like New York, upstate New York, Long Island, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and then Florida. About 4% is moving to California, and less than 1% in total are going to combined Utah, Colorado, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming. So it's really small. It seems probably overwhelming to your community, but I think the majority of the growth in Montana is likely coming from places like Seattle and San Francisco and LA, not so much the East Coast.
Ah, interesting. Okay. Would you say that the boom in real estate going on right now, is that due to a lower inventory? Is that what's pushing what seems to be a bullish market?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of what Robyn said and Eric, the lack of inventory. Interest rates are so low. I mean, real interest rates drive a lot of consumer behavior and activity.
Sure.
You are seeing people who want to leave. Yes, people are leaving cities. And for someone leaving New York City, a $1 million home, if you have 2 high-earning individuals, leaving New York City and spending $1 million in Bozeman seems like a deal. And so you are getting quite a bit of demand, because it just seems so much cheaper than living and paying for real estate in large cities.
Sure. Speaking of sort of the sizes of cities, Bozeman's right at the threshold, maybe just past sort of the micropolitan versus metropolitan size of the city. Talk to me a little about that number and the difference and what that means for a place like Bozeman.
Sure. So Bozeman, congratulations, just crossed the 50,000 population mark this summer. And that moves it from a designation federally as a micropolitan to a metropolitan. And that's important for a number of reasons. But the primary opportunity for the city is that it gets access to federal grants for infrastructure projects. So roads, sewer, public transportation, utilities, fiber optic cable, all of those infrastructure costs can now be supercharged with federal grants. That's important for a number of reasons. One, you're able to then keep up with the growth, really keep up with that quality of living that people expect, sort of ease that gridlock and traffic going into Bozeman that Robyn was talking about, allows for a little bit more growth outside the city and downtown and create hubs elsewhere, but interconnected hubs. And what you don't want is sprawl, certainly, but you do want to have other attractions and areas of interest within downtown Bozeman. And those grants and that progression of growth will really help that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, that's a big deal. It's a huge threshold to cross. Speaking of similar sort of growth trends, I mean, what are you noticing right now in the airline industry? I mean, we've seen travel fall off a cliff in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
What are you noticing?
So around mid-April, we started to see growth and return to air travel and hotel stays. But that peaked in July 4th, which was about the same time we saw that spike in the coronavirus cases across the South and the Southwest. And so since then, we've really plateaued, and of even more recently, we've seen a decrease in growth in travel. We might see one last travel spike over Labor Day, but then once school returns, I don't think we're going to see much growth in the airline and travel industry because of the decrease in corporate travel that we're so used to and accustomed to once everybody gets back to school. The reality, Joe, is that we're still down 70 to 80% in air travel year over year, which is enormous. People are traveling. They're traveling to more regional drive-to destinations, and you're seeing hotel occupancies, creep up into the 50, 60% in some markets that you're able to drive to. But it's really challenging for markets like Big Sky and Bozeman, which are so dependent on airlift. And I think you're going to see a slower recovery in hotel occupancy because of the dependence on air versus drive-to.
Yeah, absolutely. Similar type of conversation I was just having with a friend of mine in the media industry in Hawaii, and they are seeing a very different story out there. Obviously, there is no drive-to traffic on an island, but you think that that can kind of play out here as well.
It could. I mean, look, you're only 5-6 hours from some of the larger cities. And you've got one of the most incredible national parks, if not the best national park in the country. So you are seeing people. That's why you can't get a Winnebago right now. You can't get an Airstream. They're all used up or rented out or sold, and they're all in Montana right now. So people will drive to amazing destinations, and I think you're seeing it and you're benefiting that from this summer. I haven't looked, but I bet the Yellowstone National Park numbers are only slightly below where they were in the last few years.
No, that's definitely the case. You're seeing fewer tour buses per se, but there are a lot more vehicles.
That gets harder though when it's 10 degrees and it's outside, so people aren't really going to be driving in the winter to Big Sky. Yeah,
well, you led me right into my next question. You're a skier, worked on the Alta race crew in Utah. What are you hoping for this ski season, and is that in line with what you think will happen?
Yeah.
We're into this sort of crystal ball situation again.
I'm very bullish on the ski season, not just in Big Sky, but nationally. I think similar to what we saw in the golf industry this summer, which had incredible growth in rounds played, people are going to be looking for safe outdoor activities. And if the mountain operators can figure out food and beverage and how to keep people warm when they aren't skiing, how to move people safely from point A to point B and from the base to the peak, then I think the ski season will be very successful, especially for drive-to ski resorts. The harder to access mountains like Big Sky and Telluride might be challenged, but with Bozeman's growth and the anticipation of a really strong snow season with La Nina, I think Big Sky will be really surprised about the skier visit numbers. You guys are getting a ton of press and PR with the opening of the hotels, with the expansion and the investment in the mountain itself. Maybe I'll have to go back on some of my earlier comments, but I think people will make the effort to get there for what Big Sky has to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that is good insight. There's a lot of positives still, certainly going for this place.
Yeah, I think those Bozeman skiers are going to come out of the woodwork and they'll drive up the canyon.
Sure thing. Well, similar to some of the questions posed to earlier panelists, we talked about cycles, crystal balls. Where do you see Bozeman and the Mountain West in a year from now?
Sure. So usually cycles are driven by supply and demand imbalances, and we never really had a real cycle here. It was driven by a health event. And so I think certainly for Bozeman, you're going to see growth numbers probably in that 5 to 6% in population growth this year, compared historically to about 3 to 4%, which is going to put a lot of pressure on the supply, whether it's apartment housing or residential housing. As Robyn said, there's just, from my looking at the data, there just isn't a lot of supply, tons of demand. And so as long as developers are in the market building, you're going to see those homes get absorbed, which is great for the market. And as long as some of those prices can get kept in check. So I think Bozeman is going to enjoy a bit of a longer cycle because of the migration patterns and changes in population that we've all been talking about this evening.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting year in the market, and hope everyone's hoping for the best. Before, I'd like to ask each of the panelists a question. Before we do that, Brandon, I'd love to just kick it over to you and ask if you've got any follow-ups or if we have any audience questions. You.
Thank you, Joe. I had 2 quick follow-ups for you, Mike. First off, you just touched on the short-term predictions for the Bozeman market, but I'm curious, how about Big Sky?
Same. When the amount of PR dollars gets poured into any location, whether it's an island destination or a ski resort destination, there's just so much capital and activity. And I'm sure you've been seeing it. You've been named as the top 5 ski resort destinations, and you're in every ski magazine or lifestyle magazine. That drives a lot of traffic and demand. So I think you're going to see just a similar growth as long as there's places to put heads in beds and bodies in homes.
Yeah, absolutely. And follow up to my follow-up, from the outside looking in, what are the communities of Bozeman and Big Sky, missing, so to speak, to create that sense of sustainable growth? Yeah,
so, and Eric touched upon this, and so did Robyn: culture, diversity, inclusiveness, a real purpose as a destination is really important to get to that next level of where you all want to go.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Joe, it sounded like you had one more follow-up for everyone.
Yeah, I did. Thanks. Well, we do really very much appreciate everyone's time. It's incredibly insightful to hear where we are, where we've been, where we're going. I'd like to ask each of you the question. We can start with, at the beginning, we can start with you, Ania. What is your hope for Southwest Montana, going forward in a broad context?
So I guess one of the things that I've found that COVID did for us is it fast-tracked us in terms of thinking about needs that we had in our community. They really came to light. So for example, we really became aware of the needs that we had within our community around behavioral health and substance abuse. And I think that continues to move forward with various efforts that are currently underway. I would like to think that we're all going to move forward sort of thoughtfully, especially into the winter and moving into the future. In order to do that, we have to be careful. We have to stay safe. We have to keep precautions in place. And really something that Mike just said about being thoughtful and purposeful about your future ties into something that Eric said earlier today about we're not just a ski resort anymore. And that was really brought to light when everything closed down in March and people stayed, and they stayed for months. And it wasn't about the skiing, and they enjoyed the cross country ski trails, and they enjoyed going for walks, and they were patrons of businesses in the area that decided to stay open. And so for me, it's really about community. I love seeing the community come together, and nowhere do we see that more than when we're challenged. So that's where I hope to see Big Sky grow moving into the future.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think we've all witnessed that. Everyone's sort of playing their role in a small community. Everyone pulling on the rope to keep this thing spinning as best we can and really supporting each other. So thank you, Ania, very much. Really appreciate that answer.
Thank you.
Eric, we'll pose the same question to you. What's your hope for this area, for Southwest Montana, going forward?
Thanks, Joe. I will preface this by saying I'm the fourth generation of my family to be in the development or real estate business in some way. My hope or wish for Southwest Montana is controlled, slow, thoughtful development. So almost what I mean by that is less development and more of a focus on conservation. And the reason I say that is there's no putting the cat back in the bag here. Montana's been discovered. Brad Pitt did his shadow casting from The Rock. People have found out about this place. The money's here. As Mike said, the marketing dollars are massive. I mean, people need to understand the amount of money that's being dumped into PR to make people aware of Montana is massive. The population growth on this planet is only getting bigger. People are coming. There's no stopping that now. What we need to do is we need to remember why we all moved here. And that was because the first time you were here, you saw people waving from truck to truck as you passed on the road, or the amazing open farm fields that are full of deer grazing, or the amazing farmers that make their living off running cattle on the land, or the clean water on the Gallatin River and being able to catch fish, or this amazing gem, as Mike said, of Yellowstone National Park. All of this stuff needs to quickly become the #1 priority before it is development. Development's going to happen. It's great. We're all going to make a great living. They're going to build houses, all this stuff. There's no stopping that now. What we need to quickly do is give the means to the conservation groups so it's not showing up with a knife to a gunfight when they go to try to counterbalance growth. And so we as a community need to quickly rally behind all of the groups that are doing a good job in helping protect this place that we all love. And that's going to drive real estate values way higher than any marketing ad will. If we keep open fields, clean water, amazing trails, all of that stuff a priority, all of our real estate's going to be worth more money, and we're going to drive a lot more sales in the future and be something we can be proud of. So now's the time to put your shoulder behind groups like the Nature Conservancy or the Montana Land Reliance or the Gallatin River Task Force. These groups are doing the work that is so important right now, and they have budgets that are they have the 1/100th of what a developer's budget is. So we've got to help out, and we all have to pitch in, and we got to do it right now. So my hope is that conservation and the animals in the water and all that stuff become a priority really quickly. And that will help our development and our values down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, great answer. And yeah, I think we can all hope that the alternative isn't a pretty picture. Robyn, love to ask you the same question. Tell us, what your hope is for Southwest Montana, looking into the future.
Well, my personal hope is that it's still a place where we all want to live and work. When we saw the growth cycle that occurred in the early 2000s, I think Bozeman, and in particular Greater Bozeman, was very smart about parks, open space, preserving farm ground. We've seen voters vote for bond issues for parks and trails and open space. And Eric is absolutely right, whether it's the work that the Gallatin Valley Land Trust has done or some of the bigger national conservations, we need to think about, I always say we have to protect the golden goose. If we destroy what has made Montana so popular, we can't sustain it. And then I kind of have like another concept that's near and dear to my heart, and that is in a time of crisis or a time of need, a small enough community can come together to do transformational work. And it's an opportunity for arts and culture. I would love to dream and believe that what we will be known for, especially in Bozeman, is our vibrant arts and culture, and the fact that we care about that for everyone, not just the elite. So I think we have, as leaders, a great opportunity to shape the next decade and the next generations to come. But we have to thoughtfully come together as quickly as possible to make sure that we are managing what used to be called smart growth, but growth with a purpose and a vision. And I do believe that at least in the city of Bozeman and Gallatin Valley, we do have that leadership in place, but as citizens, we have to make sure that we're also involved.
Sure thing. Yeah, the arts and culture community in Bozeman is something special. It's a tough time right now, right? I mean, everything's a little bit shaky, but I think we can all hope that it comes back as vibrant as it was, and if not stronger. But thank you very much for that, Robyn. Much appreciated. Mike Magrans, what is your hope for Southwest Montana going forward?
Ask me again in 12 months.
Yes, well, I plan to. We'll do this again. Yeah. Any thoughts of based on the data and analysis that you and your team have done? Any predictions or anything you hope that Southwest Montana, the Bozeman, the Big Sky area can hold on to?
Yeah. So I think touching back upon my previous statement is just making sure that the spirit, I think, that you're trying to create, and the special place that it is, that it's sustainable. So everybody talks about sustainable living and sustainable growth, and that is one of the biggest challenges that our clients have, and developers and investors, is how to make sure that you're incorporating what the community wants into your growth, into your development. And so, making sure that the community has a voice, really putting the developers and the operators, in that circle of decisioning with the community. I think that's really important. So I'm optimistic, though. I really believe in the market and the area and the Rocky Mountain West in general, and excited to see what happens next. Yeah, no, I think we all are. Everyone's on pins and needles here, but well, look, I just want to say again, thank you all, our panelists. Thank you so much for your time this evening. It's been incredibly insightful, and
I believe our audience has really learned a lot, and I have too. So thanks again for your time. I'd love to kick it over to Brandon to take us home.
Thank you, Joe. Well, once again, I'd like to thank our sponsors tonight, Shore to Summit Wealth Management, LNK Real Estate, and the Big Sky Chamber of Commerce, as well as all of our panelists for joining us. It appears that real estate is in fact thriving in these uncertain times. I'd like to take a moment to ask everyone, what makes your house a home? Is it the people you share it with, the memories made there, or more broadly, the landscape that allows you to be who you are? Whether one or all of these reasons, now more than ever, it is vital to appreciate and be mindful of all that we have and all that we share. Thank you and have a good evening.